Hello, welcome to another Sonic Lab. We're here today with Tosh from Widge Productions. Tosh uses Apollo UAD system, which we've reviewed in the past. Use it for sort of live processing, right?
A mixture. I'm using a lot of live recording, and then the main reason I got it was for the powered plugins for mixing.
Right, okay, and you've been using a number of different plugins since you got it, right?
Yes, yeah, I tried out a whole load, recently settled on things like the Plate reverbs, Lexicon reverbs, the Ocean Way Studios, the Tape Sims, and some of the EQs, all fantastic plugins.
So Tosh has been looking at the new Universal Audio Fairchild, is it 670 plugin?
Yeah, the new 670 limiter collection.
And it's basically, for those of you who don't know, what would you call the Fairchild? It's like the holy grail of all compressors, isn't it? Right?
Well, yeah, many people refer to it like that. This is a vintage compressor, a valve compressor, so it's often known as a Vari-Mu, given the way it works. Quite rare units, but even if you haven't heard of them, you're quite likely to have heard their sonic characteristics. So many classic recordings have been put through these. Most of the Beatles were done on these, even if they weren't actually limiting at the time, just their sonic characteristics.
So the sound of the signal going through them.
Yeah, I mean, these things have got 14 valves and 20 transformers. There's going to be some colour in the chain.
And they were originally used for actually just before you get to vinyl, weren't they, to kind of restrict the movement of the actual needle, yeah?
Yes, the original design was for a very high fidelity, very fast and transparent limiter that would go at the very end of the chain. What was unique about these was that they are actually two independent limiters that could work either as a left-right stereo setup or using a lat vert, as they refer to it, which is essentially mid-side. So this is controlling the movement of the needle to prevent excessive travel in there, so you couldn't get the needle jumping out of the groove.
So I guess it would be the cutting head of the lathe rather than the needle.
Yes, yeah.
So we're talking actual sort of the thing that you put on wire that was cutting the wax of the disc, basically, right?
Basically to prevent excessive play or movement, I suppose, due to transients. So the key thing there was that it was designed to be incredibly high fidelity, loads of headroom, very smooth and very fast. So, for example, the attack times are in the order of 200 microseconds.
Which for valve gear must have taken quite some engineering, I'd imagine.
Yeah, precisely, which is why these are quite big beasts with a lot of electronics inside them.
So Universal Audio have already been making the Fairchild, but this is the kind of new, super version, right?
Yes. So this is they've named it the limiter collection. Essentially, what you get is the 670, which is the twin channel system. You also get the 660, which in the original hardware was a mono limiter, but in the plug-in version you can pass a stereo signal through it and both sides are compressed in the same way. Although in essence they're essentially the same thing, because they're modelled on hardware units, there are subtle sonic differences between them. So they claim that the non-linearities in the gain reduction circuit, the time constants, there are subtle differences just due to hardware.
So we're getting to quite sort of boffin clipboard level of micro-engineering there.
I mean, in terms of on a practical level, it's having a slightly different sonic palette to work with, depending on how you use these.
And what they've done, this newer version has paid sort of more attention to the input and the output stage, so you get the sound of it even without the compression.
That's right. I think the original system, due to the limitations of the UAD1 platform, it was impractical to model absolutely everything, whereas here you've got much higher fidelity of the entire audio chain through the device. So
how have you been using it? You've been kind of living with it for a little while, and what have you been using it on? How have you found it?
Well, I've been using it on quite a number of different applications. I've been mixing some salsa, some R&B, and some jazz, and just finding different uses for this. Some of it purely tonal, using the colour of the compressor, and others actually using the limiting and the mid-side aspects of it. So I've got a few applications here that I can show you.
Perhaps we should just take a look at the controls. I mean, what have we got here that's kind of different from the hardware, effectively, that we're allowed to get to in DSP world?
Okay, well, if we look at the 670, they've done a very nice rendition of the interface, even little details like the lighting the background, which I quite like. But in terms of the controls, these are all standard controls up here. Your metering selection, so input, output, gain reduction. The input to the compressor and the threshold selection, which if you're like me and you haven't grown up with hardware you've been mixing in the box, you might be looking at this thinking, where's the attack and release controls? How do I set the knee? Because of the design of these compressors, they work slightly differently. So the threshold knob, if you set that to 0, that's basically no compression, and the more clockwise you turn it, the more compression you're getting, the lower you're setting the threshold. Also, driving up the input gain is effectively doing the same by putting more signal into above the threshold. In terms of attack and release, you don't have infinitely adjustable settings. You've got a 6-position selector here, which will give you the first 4 give you fixed attack and release times ranging from it's about 200 microseconds attack there up to 800 on setting 4.
But still pretty slow. I mean, that microseconds. So
it is a microsecond, so we're sub-millisecond.
Yeah. Can you hear the difference much between those? I mean, is it?
Yes, you can. I can show you on an example later how the subtle impact of that. Then if we use positions 5 and 6, these have got program-dependent release. So these are quite good for overall mix settings or for more complex audio where you've got up to 25 seconds release if you've got continually high program material.
So that's perhaps more modern applications.
Yeah, possibly, yes. And this AGC control basically decides whether you're going to use the system in left-right stereo mode or mid-side mode, which is referred to as lat-vert here. Those controls are all pretty much standard from the unit. What they've added are some enhancements to make the system a bit more flexible. First of these is a mix knob down here, which basically allows you to blend wet and dry signals. So you can do parallel compression very easily with this.
In line without having to set up extra bussing.
Exactly, yeah. Okay. It's very convenient. A sidechain filter, again, which didn't feature on the original hardware, which allows you to, it's basically a high-pass filter that you can set the cutoff frequency. Very good for taking out the bass, stopping that, making the system pump if you need that, that facility. Then these 2 switches, also very useful. They allow you to link or unlink the sidechain and the controls. So in link mode, both limiters will be powered off the same sidechain signal, so you'll get the same amount of compression on the left and right channel or the mid-side channel, depending on what mode you're in. If you unlink them, they will use independent detection on each channel, so the mid channel will have its own sidechain detection, and so will the sides, so they will compress independently of each other. You can end up with quite big movements on your stereo image, particularly if you're using left and right.
Just you talking about the mid-side thing. I mean, would you actually perhaps use that when you've been recording in mid-side mode with mid-side's pair of mics? Would that be an application for it, or would it be something else?
I think it's more using having a regular stereo signal going into it, because they've got the mid-side matrix in there, so it will take a stereo signal and split it into mid-side, then recombine it after processing, rather than taking a mid-side signal into it. And
but it treats it slightly differently, so you get an overall different sonic effect.
Yeah, I mean, it's you'll see later on that we've been using it for widening some material, in quite a subtle way. So it's a very useful and powerful feature. You can also unlink the controls. At the moment, they're set so that you turn one input gain and the other one, everything's matched together. But you can unlink that so you can get completely independent control of each aspect.
If you want to get more useful if you're mastering and you've got
or even with mid-side as well. If you want you got kick going down the center channel, and you want to, for example, use the sidechain filter to stop the compressor acting on that, but you still want to keep things tight with the sides. Unlinking allows you to do that. The other control, which is a standard control on the hardware, which I haven't mentioned, is down here, this little DC threshold, which is actually, even though it's hidden away, it's quite an important control. This effectively allows you to control the knee of the compressor.
Right.
So you can go from over here, soft knee, all the way over to a hard knee. I think in the hardware it was something like effectively 2:1 to 30:1 when you get over there. But basically the combination of DC threshold, the threshold control and the input gain will give you your overall compression characteristic. And really, unlike kind of most regular compressors where you're used to kind of seeing, you might see a graph showing you your knee and everything, here you really have to use the meter and your ears to understand where you are on that.
So that's great. I mean, can we listen to what it does? I mean, I've heard it's quite a subtle...
Yes, definitely. Even though there's all those valves and transformers in there, this is not... bearing in mind it was designed for extremely high fidelity, You can make it gritty. In fact, that's one other control I haven't mentioned, this little headroom dial here, which has also been added. The original system had a huge amount of headroom to prevent distortion. This allows you to bring that down so you can actually force the system to
dial the valve distortion into the system.
Yes.
Right, okay.
So giving a bit of some examples of this. This is a bit of this is a reggaeton tune by a band called Timbaterra that I've been working on. I've been using the Fairchild quite extensively in the mix on this, on a number of different instruments. If we just focus in on the piano here. Here I'm using the 670 and I'm making use of quite a few of those additional features. For a start, I'm using the compressor in parallel to try and bring up a bit more body on the piano. If I take it out now, the original piano was an electric stage piano, not particularly great tone, but not bad. Bringing the compressor in, I'm adding a bit of more warmth to it. I'm using it in parallel. If I go to 100% through the compressor,
oh yeah, that's pretty vicious, isn't it?
I'm squashing it quite a lot. I mean, I'm using the fastest attack times. I'm using it in mid-side mode to try and widen the stereo image of the piano as well. So what you see, the side chains are unlinked, so the mid channel is being compressed a lot more than the side channel. So in effect, what's happening is the sides are being brought up.
It's throwing the sides out and up a level, right?
So tighten up the middle. And if you listen when I switch it in and out, you're getting a bit more of a sense of width there. Now that's quite...
It is subtle though, isn't it? But it definitely
is
it's that kind of glue vibe that people talk about with valves a lot, don't they?
So now that I'm bringing it back into 50% wet dry, the overall effect is to have a bit more body to the piano.
Yeah, you can feel it throwing out.
Yeah.
This might not come across on the final YouTube video, but I can assure you that there is actually an effect that I can hear for sure.
Okay, and if we look now at the percussion section.
Great percussion section.
Yeah, lovely mixer, great percussionist on this track. Often you'll find a Fairchild used on drum buses, and it has this wonderful sort of upper mid presence that it brings to everything you put it on, which I'm guessing is the tube and transformer circuit. If I kick it in, you can hear, again it's subtle, I'm not driving it hard here, but it's bringing out the kind of high frequencies in the percussion there, which there's Wiro.
It's like, almost like leaning forward, isn't it?
Yeah.
And out.
And I'm using the side chain here. If I bring it all in, it's going to respond to those kicks quite heavily.
Yeah, you can hear that
which
pumping.
I don't want. I want those coming through. I want the attack there. So we set these back up at about halfway, and that's letting through enough of that.
That's quite pronounced. That's quite a dramatic effect, actually, isn't it?
Yeah. Again, I'm using fast attack times on this, and mid-side, so I'm getting a bit of widening there. I've unlinked both channels as well. I haven't really played much with the settings here for the DC threshold. You notice that there's two marks there, CAL and OWR. CAL is the factory setting for the compressor, and the OWR is what Ocean Way Studios have.
Oh, right, because this is modelled on their sort of pristine
absolutely
setup they've got there, right?
But really, dialing these in and out, I mean, now because the controls are unlinked, you can, if you want, have a very different compression characteristic on the mid channel. I tend to keep them similar because you don't want that happening on the rhythm section. If we look at the horns, now if I go back to a bit of horns section, I can demonstrate the difference in colour between the new Fairchild and the previous model, the Legacy 670. So this is without either model on. Now if I switch on the Legacy 670, it's quite a fat sound, and it's quite hard to match them because the controls are subtly different.
Sounds like it's biting harder on it, doesn't it?
Whereas if I go to the newer one, it's more subtle, it's smoother. To my ear, it depends.
More of the high end, isn't it?
Yeah, depending on your preference. I particularly like the smoothness of that, and particularly when it comes to the trumpet solo. This is with the newer version. And if I kick that out, and then the previous version.
You can just picture it from a classic Dean Martin recording.
Yeah, for me, I suppose my mixing style is, for this kind of music as well, I like that sound on the horns, you know, it's a bit more of a vintage tone. And I
guess it would have actually been probably an Ocean Way kind of tone in its originality.
I mean, a lot of those classic salsa recordings have got so much valve sound and distortion and things in them, especially on the horns. Okay, so that's a couple of different applications of this. Now I've also been using it on the vocals quite extensively. Here we've got some rap vocals, which I've used the Fairchild to kind of push, to bring more in your face, slightly more aggressive sound to them.
Yo quiero verte, mami, que bailemos esta rumba
So I'm using the
fenomenal, sensual, que
660 here.
parezca
I don't
una
need all the
sandunga.
lap
La música está buena y los parlantes que
capabilities of
retumban
the
al son de los
670.
timbales, siente el bajo
This
que
is
te
without,
tumba,
right?
este
It's
tumba,
without.
el ritmo
So
reggaetón
already
y
it's quite
saboco.
in your face.
Vamos pa la pista y verás cómo retoco al movimiento
But bringing
sexy
the
girl que
compressor
vuelve
in.
loco. La
Get
gente
more-
en el party con el tumbo
more
bien
bite to the
sabroso.
upper.
Yeah, again,
Yo
it's
quiero
that
verte, mami, que
upper mid
bailemos
presence
esta rumba
and
fenomenal,
just the way the
sensual, que
compressors,
parezca una
you know,
sandunga.
on its
La música
fast
está
switching.
buena y los
Again,
parlantes que
we'll shut up so
retumban al
we
son
can-
de los timbales, siente el bajo que te tumba, esto es tumba, el ritmo reggaetón y saboco. Vamos pa la pista y verás cómo retoco al movimiento sexy girl que
It
vuelve
gives it that
loco.
little bit
La
more
gente
aggression,
en el party con el
which,
tumbo bien sabroso. Yo quiero
in
verte,
terms of
mami,
placing
que
it in the
bailemos
mix.
esta rumba fenomenal, sensual, que parezca una sandunga. La música está buena y los parlantes que retumban al son de los timbales, siente el bajo que te tumba,
And also
esto es tumba,
a bit
el
of
ritmo
warmth there as well.
reggaetón y
Yeah.
saboco. Vamos.
So on male vocals, that's great. We've also got a bit of female singer in here, which again sounds equally nice. Put through the
Y es que
Fairchild.
lo baila la panameña y una linda puertorriqueña.
Here I'm pushing it a bit harder.
Y una garota brasileña
I've reduced the headroom
y la cubana
to
que
get a bit more
son
grit. If I push this up even more,
candela.
you can hear.
Y es que lo baila
Right.
la
That's the effect of
panameña
squeezing it.
y una linda
So we want to go back a little bit, don't want too
y
much
una
distortion.
garota brasileña y la cubana que
But we've
son
got a nice bit of
That's nice.
It's
What mic
highness.
did you use originally to
Y es
record
que
that?
lo baila
That was done
la
on an
panameña
RE20.
y una
Wow.
linda
Yeah.
puertorriqueña y una
Doesn't always
garota
work with. Depends on the vocals, but for these,
brasileña y la
this
cubana
particular
que
style,
son
it was good.
So with it out?
Y es que lo baila la panameña y una linda puertorriqueña y una garota
Again, it's adding that
brasileña
upper mid presence.
y la
And a bit of
cubana
thump
que
as
son
well.
Yeah.
candela. Y es que lo baila
So I
la
noticed you've got quite a lot of
panameña
instances
y una
happening here.
linda
How's the what are you running here on the UAD?
We've got an Apollo quad here, so there's plenty of headroom if I show you now. I mean, I've got EMC plate reverbs, studio tape emulations, a couple of LA2A models in there.
So what's the kind of CPU load like for the Fairchild then? Because I'd imagine with all that extra transformer and valve modelling, it's probably sucking
I was
up a bit.
surprised actually, I was expecting to see a big jump, but for example, I think this was adding about 3% onto the overall load each instance. I can't
Right.
remember exactly, but
It's not too bad.
it's not too bad. No, if I take one out, we'll see there. So that's at 74%. 70%, yeah, so it's
So
about
3-4%.
Yeah.
So okay, that's pretty reasonable.
Yeah. One of the things that I found most prominent with this is more than just the compression, it's the sonic character that comes out.
Just running the signal through.
Just
it.
running the signal through it, and I know lots of classic recordings have used that, you know, vocals have gone through there without limiting. A good example of that is on this next track, which I've been working on for Duval Project, Bristol-based R&B band. And they've got a string section on the recording, which on its own sounds rather nice in itself, you know, very nice string players there. But putting it through the Fairchild just brings out this extra warmth to it, which you can hear quite clearly.
It's interesting, isn't it? A lot of this vintage stuff, it's almost like, it's quite subtle, but when you switch it off, you really notice that it's not there rather than noticing that it is
Absolutely,
there.
I think that's it. I mean, I've noticed this with the tape sims as well, that it's on their own. you don't notice it that much, but when you put the accumulated effect, is very impressive. And then when you take them away, you're suddenly looking at a flat, almost 2D image again. And I'm finding the same with the Fairchild. This particular application on the strings.
Because I mean, in the meters, there's very little going on as well.
There's a little going on.
dBs, but,
yeah, it's kind of smoothing out the variations. I've used mid-side again to add a bit more width to the string signal. Sitting that in the mix, it's just a lovely, wide, lush sound.
It feels complete, doesn't it? Yeah.
And the other aspect of that is I'm using the Fairchild on the bus. If I just stop this, we've got it on the stereo bus here, so I can give you an idea. Again, this is really the thing I like most about this plugin, apart from the compression characteristic. It's just the way it sounds. Stick it on the stereo bus. Let's take it out here. So here's the mix, which is sounding pretty good already, I think. But it's the added dimension when you kick this in. It's all the things we talk about: glue, a bit of warmth, presence, all these fluffy words that people use to describe this kind of vintage gear. But it's there, and it can be quite clearly heard.
So you've got the original Fairchild version of this as well. I mean,
yeah.
Would you think it would be worth the upgrade for someone who already got that?
After spending the last few weeks with this, yes. I mean, originally when I saw they'd released a new one, I thought, oh, haven't I got the Fairchild compressor already? And I was wondering what the point was. But really, the other one is very good, and it has a different sonic character. And I think there is room for that as well. And also, it's got a lower processing overhead. But for me, the sound of this compressor and the modelling of the valves and transformers just brings that extra dimension, which really opens up a mix, opens up individual instruments.
Right. So obviously the UAD platform, as we know, is a premium one. The hardware, I mean, in your case, you've got the sort of top of the range, effectively, and the plugins themselves are not the cheapest. I think it's about $299 for the collection.
Yeah.
You've got the original, though. Is there an upgrade path?
Yeah. At the moment, it's $149 to upgrade.
Right. So that's not bad. Would you consider doing that?
I would. Yeah, definitely. After having lived with it for a few weeks, yeah, I would.
I mean, obviously, it's probably not the plugin that's going to make you buy into the Apollo platform, but it's sort of, every time I review one, it's kind of a more and more compelling reason to think, I can't get this anywhere else. But
yeah, well, that's the whole reason for me going with the Apollo system in the end, because it's not about one particular plugin. It's the accumulation, all the different emulations you get in there. There's nothing like it, really.
So the Fairchild Limited Collection is available from UAD now. You get to it via the store on your UAD account. I want to say thank you very much to Tosh for coming in, and hopefully we'll have some more reviews for him in the future.